At a cafe, a stranger slid an envelope onto my table and whispered, "You'll need this tonight." I was sitting with my daughter and son-in-law when it happened. My name is Randall Pruitt. I am 66 years old, a retired civil engineer, and a widower. 2 years ago, I lost my wife Norma to what everyone called a stroke. She was 64. We had built our life together on 80 acres of land in rural Oregon. Land that had been in her family before she ever met me. After she was gone, I stayed. The land was all I had left of her. I had been going to that cafe every Thursday since she died. It smelled like coffee and pine sap and old wood, and the owner never made small talk, which I appreciated. That particular Thursday, my daughter Glenda and her husband Carl Vance were sitting across from me in the corner booth. Carl was stirring his coffee without drinking it. Glenda was doing most of the talking the way she always did when Carl had something he wanted said but did not want to say himself. "Dad, we just want what is best for you," she said. "This land is too much for one person. The taxes, the upkeep, the insurance. Winter out here alone is no joke." Carl nodded slowly. He always nodded when Glenda talked. I had noticed that about him early on and had told myself it meant he was a good listener. I understood now it meant something else entirely. I said what I always said. I have managed that land for over 40 years. I can manage it as long as I need to. Glenda gave Carl a look. I caught it the way parents always catch those looks, no matter how brief. It said, "Not yet, but soon." They got up together to pay the bill. I stayed in the booth and reached for my coat, and that was when a woman sat down across from me without being invited. She moved so quietly and so fast that I nearly knocked my water glass off the table. She looked to be in her mid-50s, dark coat, iron gray hair pulled back tight at the neck. She did not look around the room the way people do when they are nervous. Her eyes went straight to mine and stayed there. "Randall Pruitt," she said. Not a question, yes. She set a thin manila envelope on the table between us. Her hand was trembling slightly as she let go of it. "You will need this tonight," she said. Her voice low and even. "Do not open it here." Then she looked at me for one more second as if she wanted to say something else, and stood up. I started to ask who she was. She was already moving toward the door. By the time I got to my feet, she had slipped out into the parking lot and was gone into traffic. Her name, I would learn later, was Loretta Finn. She had worked alongside Norma years ago and had stayed in contact with her right up until the end. Glenda and Carl came back from the register. "Everything okay, Dad?" Carl asks, scanning the booth the way a man does when he is checking, not just asking. "Fine," I said. I had already moved the envelope into my jacket pocket. My hands were steady. After 30 years reading structural drawings and finding problems before they became disasters, I had learned how to keep my face calm when something unexpected landed in front of me. The drive back to the property was quiet. They dropped me at the end of the gravel drive and did not come in. I watched their taillights disappear down the county road, then walked up to the house alone. The pines on the north side were dark against the sky. The east field was brown and flat from the season. I knew every foot of that land. I had walked it in every kind of weather, mapped its drainage problems, repaired its fences, cleared its fallen timber. Standing there in the cold, I realized I had never once thought of it as something someone might want badly enough to take by force. Inside, I set the envelope on the kitchen table and sat across from it. I did not touch it. I'm not a man who spooks easily. But something about the way that woman had looked at me, the steadiness of it, the urgency underneath the quiet voice told me that whatever was inside that envelope was not a mistake or a prank. It was information, and information delivered that way meant someone believed I needed it before something happened. At 8:47, I slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a small brass key wrapped in tissue paper and a strip of lined notebook paper folded once. The handwriting was deliberate and neat. It said 11:32 p.m. Answer, do not call back. That was all. No name, no explanation. I checked my phone, 8:51, nearly 3 hours to wait. I locked every door in the house. That was something I had not done regularly since before Norma died. The land around the property was quiet, the way it always was at night, no voices, no headlights near the tree line. I sat at the kitchen table and turned that brass key over in my palm. It was old and heavy, the kind of key made before everything went cheap. The head was worn smooth from years of use. As an engineer, I recognized the build quality. Whatever it opened had been important for a long time. At 11:32, the phone rang. The screen showed no name, no number. I answered on the second ring. At first, there was only breathing. Slow, controlled, close to the microphone. Then a voice came through, low and slightly distorted, like it was filtered through some kind of device. But I recognized it before the first sentence was finished. I had heard that voice for 38 years in the kitchen in the morning. In the truck on long drives out to job sites. In the hospital room at the end, quieter than I had ever heard it. It was Norma. Do not trust Glenda, the voice said. Do not trust Carl, and do not trust the local police. You're not safe, Randall. The land is the reason. They want it empty. My hand went flat on the table to steady myself. This is not funny, I said. My voice came out the way it always does when something hits me hard. Flat, controlled. Who is this? A pause then. I wish I could explain everything, but I do not have much time. Randall, I did not have a stroke. What happened to me was not an accident. If you let them push you out, they will erase what I left behind, find what I left, finish it. The line crackled once and went dead. I sat there with the phone against my ear long after the screen went dark. When I finally checked the call log, there was nothing, no record of the call at all, as if it had never happened. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside started to go gray, turning that brass key over in my hand, thinking about every conversation Norma and I had in the last year of her life. The long silences when I came in from the field, the way she would close her laptop when I walked into her office, the nights she stayed up after I had gone to bed. I had put it down to worry. She had always been the one who handled the finances, tracked the property taxes, kept the paperwork organized. I told myself she was stressed about the numbers. I had been wrong about what she was stressed about. Glenda arrived the next morning without calling first. She never used to do that. When Norma was alive, Glenda always called ahead. It was a small courtesy that said she understood the house belonged to us, not to her. Now she pulled into the drive just after 8 with Carl right behind her in his own truck. They came in together like they had coordinated the approach. Carl set 2 coffees on the counter. He did not offer me one. We need to talk, Dad, Glenda said, sitting down at the kitchen table. She folded her hands the way she did when she was presenting something she had already decided on. Then talk, I said. We have been looking into your situation. The property, the finances, everything involved in maintaining this place on a fixed income alone. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts about property management companies, assisted living options in town, and a summary of what the acreage might list for in the current market. I did not touch them. Carl leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. We also spoke with someone at the county clerk's office, he said, about guardianship, just as a protective measure while things get sorted. Guardianship, I said. Temporary, Glenda said quickly. Just until we can make sure you're set up properly. It is a legal arrangement that lets us make certain decisions on your behalf. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the table. You want control of this land, I said. Carl's expression did not shift. He had a contractor's face practiced in neutral. Randall, you are 66 years old, living alone on 80 acres. If something happened out here, no one would know for days. We are trying to prevent that. We just want you safe, Glenda said. She reached over and put her hand on mine. I did not move my hand away. I sat there and let her say the rest of it. If you agree to sell and move closer to town, all of this goes away. We have already looked at some places you would like. Smaller, easier, closer to people. And if I do not agree, I said. Carl pushed off the counter and buttoned his jacket. Then we file through the courts. It takes longer that way, but the outcome is the same. He said it the way a man says something he has already accepted as settled. Think about it, Randall. You have a little time. On his way out, he paused near the back door and looked out toward the north field. It was a quick look, half a second at most, but I caught it. An engineer learns to notice where people's eyes go when they think no one is watching. I locked the door after them and stood in the kitchen until the sound of their engines faded down the road. Then I went to Norma's office and closed the door behind me. The room still smelled faintly like her hand lotion and old paper files. I had avoided it for 2 years because grief has a way of living in the specific places a person used to occupy. But I went in and I sat down at her desk and I started going through everything the way I would approach a structural problem, methodically, without assumptions, looking for what did not belong. The filing cabinet was organized the way Norma organized everything, by category, by date, labeled clearly, property tax records, insurance policies, equipment manuals, correspondence with the county. I went through each folder the way I would go through a set of drawings on a problem site, looking not for what was there but for what had been moved. It took about 20 minutes before I found it. Several folders had been repositioned recently, not removed, just shifted slightly forward in the drawer, the way papers shift when someone has been through them in a hurry and put them back close but not exactly right. Behind the deed paperwork, tucked flat against the back of the drawer, was a thin folder with no label on the tab. Inside were bank statements I had never seen. A separate account, not our joint account, opened in Norma's name alone about 18 months before she died. Cash withdrawals spaced carefully across those months, always just under $9,000, always ending exactly 3 weeks before her stroke. The total across all the withdrawals came to just over $47,000. I sat there for a long time looking at those numbers. Norma handled the finances in our house. I trusted her completely, and she had earned that trust every year of our marriage, but this account I had never known about, and these withdrawals I had never seen. If she was pulling cash at that level and keeping it off our shared records, she was paying for something she did not want traced back to either of us. I kept going. At the bottom of the second drawer, under a folder of old equipment warranties, I found a piece of yellow legal paper folded in thirds with my name written on the outside in her handwriting. Randall, if you're reading this, something went wrong and I could not stop it the way I planned. I'm sorry to leave you with this. The truth is buried. Look where I always told you to be careful. You will know what to do when you find it. You are always better at reading the ground than anyone I ever knew. I set the paper down on the desk and looked at it for a while. Then I turned to her computer. The password took me 3 tries. Our anniversary did not work. The name of the dog we had for 12 years did not work. On the 3rd try, I entered the address of the small house she had owned before we ever met, the first piece of property that was ever hers alone, and the screen unlocked. She had archived emails instead of deleting them, going back nearly 2 years. Messages to a private investigator named Howard Delbert, short and careful, nothing detailed in writing, meeting confirmations, payment acknowledgments. One message that said, only, the map section you asked for is ready. I will bring it Thursday. There were photographs in a folder on her desktop. Night shots taken from the edge of the north field, tire tracks in soft ground after a heavy rain. The tail end of a truck I did not recognize near the tree line at a timestamp of 2:14 in the morning. A stretch of ground near the old slope that Norma had always told me to stay away from, always saying the drainage there was unreliable and the footing was soft. I had believed her because she had grown up on that land, and I had not. I pulled up the county survey records I had filed 22 years ago when we did a boundary update and laid them out next to the satellite maps on the screen. I spent about an hour comparing them. I had done this kind of work for 3 decades, reading land, reading soil displacement, reading the difference between what ground looks like when it has been undisturbed for a generation and what it looks like when something has happened underneath it. The north section, about 200 yards in from the fence line, showed compaction patterns that did not match the surrounding terrain. The drainage angles were wrong. The surface had been disturbed and resettled more than once over a period of years. If I had been looking at this on a job site, I would have flagged it immediately for subsurface investigation. There was something under that field. My phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. A text message, 4 words, "You're on the right track." I set the phone face down and sat with what I now understood. Carl Vance had not stumbled into our family. He had grown up in the county 2 towns over, and his father had done land surveying work in the region for years before retiring. Carl would have had access to old survey records, unofficial ones, the kind that circulate among contractors and developers before a property ever hits the market. He had known about that section of land before he ever met Glenda. Whatever was underneath the north field, Carl had found it on paper first. Then he had found a way in through my daughter. That thought settled into my chest like cold water. Glenda had not been a target. She had been a door. I closed Norma's laptop, folded the yellow paper, and put it in my shirt pocket. Then I picked up my phone and called Howard Delbert. He answered on the second ring like he had been waiting. "I found her files," I said. "I know," he said. "How much did you find?" "Enough to understand the shape of it," I said. "I need the rest." "Can you meet tomorrow?" he said. "Not at the house." We met the next morning at a diner off the highway, 12 miles from my property. Howard Delbert was already in the back booth when I arrived. He was a lean man in his late 50s, quiet hands, the kind of face that did not give much away. He had a cup of coffee in front of him and nothing else on the table. He waited until I sat down before he spoke. "Norma came to me about 20 months before she died," he said. "She had already been watching the North Field on her own for several months before that. She had photographs, a timeline, partial plate numbers on the trucks. She knew something was happening on the land, but she did not yet know the full scope of it." "The tunnel," I said. He nodded. "There is a service tunnel under the north section, older than your house by at least 30 years, maybe more. It was built originally for irrigation routing and then expanded at some point, connected to natural rock chambers that do not appear on any public geological survey. Most people walking that land would never find the access point. It is well concealed, and the entry was made to look like a drainage structure. I thought about every time I had walked that field, every time Norma had steered me away from the slope near the tree line with some reasonable sounding explanation about footing or drainage. She had been protecting me from knowing, because knowing would have put me in the same position it eventually put her in. "Carl found it through his father's old survey work," Howard continued. unofficial maps, the kind that get passed around in contracting circles. He identified the tunnel location before he ever introduced himself to your daughter. We believe the introduction was not accidental. He targeted her, I said. He needed access to the property without drawing attention. A son-in-law has reasons to be on the land. A contractor with no family connection does not. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and looked out the window at the highway. What was he moving through it? I said. Illegal cargo. The specifics are part of the federal case, and I'm not at liberty to detail all of it. But the operation had been running for at least 4 years before Norma started documenting it. The tunnel gave them a transfer point that was completely off any surveillance grid, isolated property, family ownership, no reason for anyone to look, and Norma sent Carl a message asking him to stop. Howard looked at me steadily. She did. About 3 weeks before she died, she told him she had documentation and that she was giving him one chance to walk away before she went to federal authorities. She believed, I think, that the threat of exposure would be enough. It was not enough. No, it was not. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, a truck pulled into the diner lot and parked. Just a truck. I watched it anyway. She spent $47,000 building this case, I said. Closer to $51,000 when you include the last 2 payments she made in the final weeks. She was thorough. She documented the tunnel access points, the transfer schedules, partial records of shipments, and photographs of individuals she had identified as part of the operation. She also established a trust in your name 4 months before she died through an attorney in Portland. It was designed to protect the property from any forced sale or court-ordered transfer. She did not tell you because she did not want you involved until the case was complete. Where is the documentation now? I said. She prepared a container. Flash drives, her notebook, copies of the key records. She buried it on the east side of the property near the old fence line. She left you a way to find it in her office. I reached into my shirt pocket and set the yellow paper on the table between us. Howard looked at it and nodded. Look where I always told you to be careful, I said. She meant the north field. She meant the east fence. Howard said. She told you the north slope was dangerous to keep you away from the tunnel, but she told you the east fence needed checking every spring because of the deer pressure on the posts. She walked that fence with you more than once, I remembered. Early spring mornings, the two of us walking the east line together, her pointing out posts that needed resetting. I had thought she just liked the walk. I drove back to the property and went straight to the east fence. I knew every post along that line. There was one section, maybe 80 feet from the corner marker, where a flat stone sat against the base of a post. Norma had always said it was to keep the post from shifting in the wet season. I had never questioned it. I moved the stone and dug with my hands for about 4 minutes before I hit something solid. A sealed plastic container, airtight, the kind used for long-term outdoor storage. Inside were 3 flash drives in a Ziploc bag, a small notebook wrapped tightly in oilcloth, and a letter with my name written on the front in Norma's handwriting. I sat on the cold ground next to the east fence and read it. My dearest Randall, if you're holding this, I am so sorry I could not finish it myself. You are more capable than you have ever given yourself credit for. Use what I left. Finish it. I love you. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Then I picked up the container and carried it to the house. It was time to set the trap. Howard had been in contact with federal investigators for several months before I found the container. Norma's documentation was the final piece they needed to move, but they had been building around the operation from a different angle for over a year. When I handed over the flash drives and the notebook, Howard told me the case was ready. What the investigators needed now was a recorded admission, something that would remove any possibility of Carl's attorneys arguing he had been unaware of the activity on the property. We would give Carl the chance to provide that himself. I sent a message to Glenda from my own phone, short and plain. I told her I had thought it over and decided she was right. I said I was ready to talk about the sale and asked them to come to the house the following evening to go over a preliminary agreement. I said I had the paperwork ready to sign. Carl responded within 20 minutes. He said they would be there at 7. That told me everything I needed to know about how confident he was. A man who had doubts would have waited longer to respond. Howard came to the house that afternoon with a technician who spent about an hour making preparations. I did not need to know the details of. When they were done, the kitchen looked exactly the way it always looked. I made a pot of coffee and set the container on the table where it would be visible. Then I sat down and waited. Glenda and Carl arrived at 60:55. Carl came in first, the way he always did, scanning the room before he said hello. His eyes went to the container on the table and stayed there for just a second longer than they should have. "Glad you came around, Dad," he said. "Sit down," I said. "Copy is ready." Glenda sat across from me. She looked tired. There were things moving behind her eyes that I could not fully read. and I found I did not want to spend the energy trying. Carl stayed on his feet for a few minutes, moving around the kitchen the way he did when he was thinking, picking up the coffee cup and setting it back down. I slid a folder across the table toward Glenda. Preliminary agreement, I said. Price is in line with the current county assessment. I had an attorney look it over. Carl set his cup down and reached for the folder before Glenda could take it. He flipped through the pages with the practiced speed of a man who reads contracts regularly. I watched his shoulders relax as he went through it. He thought he had won. This looks straightforward, he said. He set the folder back on the table and looked over at Glenda with a small nod. Then he looked at me. Once this closes, we will get the north section cleaned up properly, seal everything, pull the access hardware, run new permits for the grading work. By the time construction starts up there will be nothing left to find. Glenda looked at him. Carl, it is fine, he said, not looking at her. He is signing. It is over. He picked up his coffee again. We had a good run with that operation. 4 years, no problems. The setup was perfect. But you cannot hold on to a good thing forever. The kitchen door opened. Howard came in first, followed by 4 federal agents in jackets with letters across the back. 2 more came through the front. Carl moved fast, turning toward the back door, but there was already someone there. He stopped with his hands out at his sides and his jaw set, the way a man looks when he has run the calculation and knows the numbers do not work. Glenda did not run. She sat at the table and put both hands flat on the surface and looked at me. I looked back at her. Mom knew, I said. She documented everything. She tried to give Carl a way out and he chose not to take it. Glenda's eyes filled, but she did not say anything. Earl Stanton, the county deputy who had been providing cover for the operation for years, resigned the following morning before his name appeared in any official document. It did not help him. The federal case already had his name in 3 separate places. Carl was charged with multiple federal counts. Glenda was charged as an accomplice. The trust Norma had established 4 months before she died held firm. No sale could be forced. No guardianship could be filed. The property was mine for as long as I chose to keep it. I walk the land every morning now. The north field is fenced off while investigators finish their documentation of the tunnel. A young couple is leasing the south acreage and farming it well. The house is quieter than it used to be, but it is mine in a way it has not felt since Norma died. I wrote Glenda a letter. I told her that her mother loved her without condition until the very last day. I told her that Carl had chosen her for reasons that had nothing to do with love, and that the hardest truth she would ever carry is that she let him. I did not tell her I forgave her. That is not where I am yet. I have not visited her. If you're reading this and you know what it feels like to have someone close to you dress up their self-interest as concern for you, then you already understand what this story is really about. They will talk about your age. They will talk about your health. They will call your independence a burden and their control a kindness. Do not let the language fool you. You have the right to stand on your own ground for as long as you choose to stand there. And if someone has been working quietly to protect you the way Norma protected me, look carefully at what they left behind. The people who love you tell the truth even when they are no longer there to say it out loud. The land is still here. So am I.